Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into genetics?
Sounds exciting.
Well, today we're going to unlock some serious knowledge about how traits, like your eye color or even predisposition to certain conditions, get passed down through generations.
Yeah, genetics could be so fascinating, like looking into a mirror reflecting your ancestors.
Totally. We're basically diving into a fascinating lecture on heredity.
Oh, cool.
So, to really get this, we have to rewind a bit. Go back to the 1800s
Okay.
and meet the OG of genetics himself,
Who's that?
Gregor Mendel.
Ah, Mendel, the pea plant guy.
Exactly. This guy, he wasn't some high-tech scientist. He was a monk.
Huh, a monk.
Yeah. And get this, he made groundbreaking discoveries using simple pea plants from his garden.
It's amazing how such simple experiments led to such huge breakthroughs.
Right. Like, think about it. Those little pea plants revolutionized our understanding of inheritance.
It's incredible. So how did he actually do it with the pea plants?
Mendel's approach was super meticulous. He carefully tracked the traits of thousands of pea plants,
Wow.
Controlling their breeding very precisely.
That must have taken a lot of patience.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's how he was able to figure out those basic principles of inheritance, the ones that, well, pretty much still hold true even today.
Totally. Can you walk us through one of his experiments? So we can see how he actually discovered this stuff?
Absolutely. So one of the things Mendel focused on was crossbreeding plants that had different traits.
Okay, like what?
Like he took true breeding purple-flowered pea plants
Okay, purple flowers.
and crossed them with true breeding white-flowered plants.
Got it. So two groups with completely opposite traits.
Yeah,
What happened when he, combined them?
Okay, so the first generation of offspring,
Ah, the kids.
yeah, the kids, the F1 generation, all of them had purple flowers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was like the white flower trait just vanished into thin air.
Wait, so no blend, like no light purple flowers.
Nope, not at all. And this actually went against what was popular back then, this idea called the blending hypothesis.
The blending hypothesis.
Yeah, they thought traits from the parents would kind of mix together in their offspring.
Like mixing paint.
Right. Exactly. But Mendel's pea plants showed something totally different was going on.
So what happened next with the purple flowers?
Well, Mendel, he let the F1 generation, those purple-flowered plants, self-pollinate. And guess what happened in the second generation, the F2 generation?
I don't know what.
The white flower trait, it popped back up.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
So it wasn't gone. It was like hiding.
Exactly. Hiding out, and then bam, it reappears.
That's so wild. Genetics is full of surprises.
It really is. And here's the thing. The white flower trait, it didn't just randomly reappear. It came back in a very specific ratio.
Oh, what ratio?
3-to-1.
3-to-1.
Yeah. For every 3 purple-flowered plants, there was 1 white-flowered plant.
Okay, that's super specific.
Yeah, and this was like a huge clue for Mendel.
So how did he explain this whole disappearing, reappearing act?
Well, Mendel's work, it led to this revolutionary idea, the idea of genes.
Genes. The blueprint of life.
Right, these units of inheritance that, control specific traits.
Okay, so we have genes.
Yeah.
And then there are different versions of genes.
Exactly, and those are called alleles.
Allele.
Yep. So imagine genes like a blueprint for a house, right?
Okay, yeah.
Alleles are like, different variations of that blueprint. Like one allele might be for a blue house and another might be for a yellow house.
Got it. So one gene for house color, but different alleles for different colors.
Exactly.
I'm getting it. So Mendel, he said we inherit 2 alleles for each trait, 1 from each parent.
Exactly. That's the key. Now, these alleles, they can be dominant or recessive.
Okay, so dominant versus recessive.
Yeah, so in our pea plant example, the purple flower allele, it's dominant.
Dominant.
And the white flower allele, it's recessive.
Recessive.
So even if a plant gets both a purple allele and a white allele,
It'll be purple.
purple flowers, the dominant one wins out.
So that's why all those first-generation plants, the F1 generation, were all purple, even though
So
they were carrying that hidden recessive allele for white flowers,
you got it.
Right.
It was just waiting for its chance to show up.
hiding in the shadows.
Exactly. And that chance came along in the F2 generation.
Okay, when the F1 plants self-pollinated.
Right. Some of the offspring, they ended up getting 2 copies of that recessive white flower allele.
Ah, so no dominant purple to cover it up.
Exactly. And boom, white flowers.
Okay, I can see how that 3-to-1 ratio popped up now.
Yeah, it all comes down to the probability of inheriting those different combinations of alleles.
This is amazing. So Mendel basically revolutionized our understanding of inheritance,
It
right?
totally did.
Like these observations, they led him to develop his two laws of inheritance.
Yeah, these laws are still like the foundation of genetics today.
Okay, can you break them down for us?
Of course, the first one, it's the law of segregation.
Okay, law of segregation.
And it basically says that when gametes are formed,
Gametes.
yeah, sperm and egg cells,
Okay, yeah.
the allele pairs, they separate or segregate.
So each parent only passes down one of their two alleles for a specific trait.
Exactly.
So like which allele gets passed down, it's totally random.
Yeah, it's like flipping a coin.
Heads, you get this allele. Tails, you get that allele.
Exactly. And that's actually super important for diversity.
It's what mixes things up, keeps things interesting.
Exactly. Now, the second law, it's called the law of independent assortment.
Ooh, law of independent assortment.
This one's a little bit trickier.
Okay, break it down for us.
Basically, it says that different genes and their alleles, they're inherited independently of each other.
What does that mean?
So think about this. Mendel, he looked at seed shape in his pea plants, whether they were round or wrinkled.
Okay, round or wrinkled.
And he also looked at seed color, whether they were yellow or green.
Got it.
And what he found was that whether a seed was round or wrinkled, it had absolutely no effect on whether it was yellow or green.
Wow, so inheriting one trait doesn't dictate what you get for another trait.
Exactly, they're inherited independently.
That's fascinating. So, with all this talk about genes and alleles and inheritance, how do we actually predict the chances of inheriting certain traits? Is there a way to, look into the future of our genes?
Well, we don't have a crystal ball or anything,
Yeah.
but we do have something called Punnett squares.
Punnett squares, what are those?
They're like this visual tool, like a diagram,
Okay.
that we can use to predict the possible genotypes and phenotypes of offspring.
Hold on, back up a sec.
Yeah.
Genotype and phenotype, remind me what those are again.
Right, so genotype is the actual genetic makeup.
A combo of alleles.
Exactly. And phenotype, that's what we actually see, the physical expression of those genes.
Okay, so genotype is the code, and phenotype is what the code produces.
Precisely. So let's go back to Mendel's pea plants.
Okay.
We know the F1 generation, they all had purple flowers, right? But we also know they carried that recessive allele for white flowers.
Right, hiding out.
Exactly. So using a Punnett square, we could see that there's a 25% chance, so 1 in 4, that an F2 offspring...
That's the second generation.
Right, that an F2 offspring would inherit two recessive alleles and, end up having white flowers.
So it's like a probability chart.
Yeah, exactly. It helps us see the different possible combinations of alleles and how likely they are to occur.
That's really cool. So Punnett squares help us peek into the possibilities of inheritance.
Exactly.
Now, what if we're looking at someone with a dominant trait?
Okay.
How do we know if they have two copies of the dominant allele, which is called homozygous,
Right, homozygous.
or if they have one dominant and one recessive allele, heterozygous?
That's a great question.
Is there a way to tell?
There is. We use something called a test cross.
A test cross. What's that?
It's basically a breeding experiment
Okay.
where we take an individual showing the dominant trait and we breed them with an individual who's homozygous recessive for that trait.
So we know for sure what that second parent's alleles are
Exactly. And then we look at the offspring.
to see what traits show up.
Exactly. So if any of the offspring show the recessive trait...
It means that first parent must have been carrying that recessive allele.
You got it. So the test cross, it helps us figure out that unknown genotype of the dominant parent.
That's pretty clever, like a little genetic detective work.
It is.
So far, we've been talking about this idea of simple dominance.
Right.
Where one allele totally overrides the other.
Yeah.
But genetics, it's way more complicated than that, right?
Absolutely. There's so much more to inheritance than just simple dominance.
Like what? Are there other patterns of inheritance we should know about?
Definitely. There's incomplete dominance.
Okay, incomplete dominance.
Yeah, where neither allele completely dominates.
So what happens?
You get a blend of the traits. A good example is snapdragon flowers.
Snapdragons.
You can have red ones, white ones, or pink ones.
So pink is like a mix of red and white.
Exactly. It's like they're blending together.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then there's also multiple alleles.
Okay, multiple alleles.
This is where there are more than just two versions of a gene.
More than two. I thought it was always just two, one from each parent.
Well, for some genes, there can be more than two alleles floating around in the population.
Wow.
A classic example is the ABO blood group system.
Right. You have A, B, and O blood types.
Exactly. And those are determined by different combos of 3 alleles.
The alleles.
Yep, 3. And this blood type system is super important.
Especially for blood transfusions.
Exactly. You have to make sure the donor and recipient have compatible blood types.
Otherwise, there can be serious complications.
Right.
Okay, that's multiple alleles.
And there's even more. There's something called pleiotropy.
Pleiotropy. Say that 5 times fast.
I know, right?
So what is it?
Pleiotropy is when a single gene can affect multiple traits.
Wait, so one gene with multiple effects?
Exactly. It's like a multitasker gene.
Wow. A good example is sickle cell anemia.
Sickle cell anemia.
It's caused by a single gene mutation, but that mutation, it affects the shape of red blood cells.
Okay.
And this shape change, it triggers all sorts of health problems.
Oh, no. So it's like one gene causing a domino effect.
Exactly. It can impact pain levels, fatigue, organ damage, and even increase the risk of infections.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
It really shows how complex and interconnected our genes can be.
Okay, one more thing before we move on.
Sure.
I'm thinking about traits like height or skin color.
Okay.
They have like a whole range of variations.
Right. It's not just tall or short or light or dark.
Exactly. How does that work genetically?
Great question. Those traits involve polygenic inheritance.
Polygenic inheritance.
Meaning multiple genes are at play.
Okay, so multiple genes working together.
Yeah, and each of these genes, it has like a small effect.
Uh-huh.
But they all add up to create a whole spectrum of phenotypes, not just distinct categories.
Huh.
So instead of just tall or short, you have a whole range of heights determined by the interactions of many genes.
Exactly. It's like a team effort.
That makes sense. But what about the environment? Does that play a role too?
Oh, absolutely. The environment plays a huge role, especially in shaping those polygenic traits.
Okay, like how?
Well, think about it. Even if someone has genes that predispose them to be tall, their nutrition can have a massive impact on how tall they actually become.
So it's not just nature, it's nurture too.
Exactly. Genes, they provide the blueprint,
Okay,
but the environment, it influences how that blueprint actually gets expressed.
that's incredible. We've covered so much, from Mendel's groundbreaking experiments to the complexities of polygenic inheritance and how the environment plays a role.
I know, right? It's
Yeah.
amazing how much we've learned about genetics.
This is truly mind-blowing.
Oh,
But there's still so much more to explore in the world of genetics, right?
absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Well, I can't wait to dive into more. Okay, so we just talked about how the environment can really impact those polygenic traits like height. But are there any examples of the environment, directly impacting a trait determined by a single gene?
Oh, definitely. A really good example is the color of hydrangea flowers.
Hydrangeas.
Yeah. Two hydrangeas, they can have the exact same genes for flower color, but one might bloom pink and the other one blue.
Wait, really? How is that possible?
It all comes down to the acidity of the soil.
Ah, the soil pH.
Exactly. If the soil is more acidic,
Ah.
the hydrangeas tend to bloom blue.
Okay.
But if the soil is more alkaline, less acidic,
They bloom pink.
pink flowers.
So it's like the soil's pH acts as a switch,
Yeah,
flipping the color of the flowers.
exactly. It's a perfect example of how the environment can directly modify how a gene is expressed.
That's super cool. I guess you never know what you're going to get with those hydrangeas.
Yeah, it makes gardening a little bit of an adventure.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about genes on autosomes, the chromosomes that are the same in males and females.
Yeah.
But what about genes that are located on the sex chromosomes?
Ah, the X and the Y.
Exactly. Do those follow the same rules?
That's a great question. And it brings us to the fascinating world of sex-linked inheritance.
Sex-linked inheritance. Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It has its own set of rules.
I bet. Can you give us a quick refresher on the basics of sex chromosomes? For those of us who haven't thought about biology class in a while.
Of course. So in humans, sex is determined by the X and Y chromosomes.
Okay.
Females, they have 2 X chromosomes,
So yes.
while males have 1 X and 1 Y.
One of each.
Yeah, so basically it's the father who determines the sex of the child.
Because he can pass down either an X or a Y.
Exactly. Now, genes that are located on the X chromosome,
Okay.
we call those X-linked genes.
X-linked genes.
Yeah, and here's the thing, because males only have 1 X chromosome, they're actually more likely to express recessive traits that are linked to those X-linked genes.
Why is that?
Well, females have 2 X chromosomes.
Right.
So if they inherit a recessive allele on one of their X chromosomes,
Yeah.
they might have a dominant allele on their other X chromosome to, cover it up.
Ah, so they have a backup copy.
Exactly. But males, they don't have that backup.
So if they inherit a recessive allele on their X,
It gets expressed.
Oh, I see. Are there any, like, well-known examples of these X-linked recessive traits?
Definitely. A classic one is color blindness.
Color blindness. Oh, yeah, I remember those tests in school with all the colored dots.
Yeah.
Like, is that number a 7 or a 3? I could never tell.
Uh-huh. Yeah, those tests. So color blindness, it's way more common in males than in females.
Because of that single X chromosome.
Exactly. Another example is hemophilia.
Hemophilia, that's a bleeding disorder, right?
Yeah, it's where the blood doesn't clot properly.
It can be really serious.
It can be, and it's also caused by an X-linked recessive gene.
Wow, so a mother carrying that recessive allele,
Could pass it on to her son.
and he would develop hemophilia.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have another X chromosome to, like, counteract it.
Exactly.
Wow, it makes you realize how much our genes can impact our life.
It really does.
But if those X-linked recessive disorders are more common in males,
Uh-huh.
does that mean females can never be affected?
Well, females can still be affected, but it's much rarer.
So a female would need to inherit 2 copies of the recessive allele
Exactly. One from each parent.
to actually express the trait.
Yeah, but there's another interesting thing that happens with X chromosomes in females.
Oh,
It's called X inactivation.
X inactivation.
Yeah. Early on in development in females,
Uh-huh.
one of the 2 X chromosomes in each cell is randomly inactivated.
Inactivate.
Yeah, it's like it gets switched off.
Oh, wow. Why does that happen?
It's thought to be a way to make sure that females, like males, only have one functional copy of most X-linked genes.
Ah, so it's like balancing things out.
Exactly. It's like flipping a coin in each cell to decide which X chromosome gets turned off.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And the inactivated X chromosome, it actually condenses into this structure called a bar body.
A bar body.
Yeah.
Okay, but if one X chromosome is inactive, how could a female who's heterozygous for an X-linked recessive disorder actually show any symptoms?
That's a great question. So remember how X inactivation is random?
Yeah, like flipping a coin.
Exactly. So in some cells, the X chromosome with the dominant allele might be the one that's inactivated.
Oh, wait.
And in other cells, the X chromosome with the recessive allele might be the one that's inactivated.
Oh, I see. So it's like a mix.
Yeah,
Some cells expressing the dominant allele and some expressing the recessive one.
exactly. It creates this mosaic effect.
Mosaic. Like a work of art.
Kind of like a patchwork quilt where different patches are expressing different alleles.
I love that analogy. So
Mhm.
are there any, like, real-life examples of this mosaicism?
Definitely. Think about tortoiseshell cats.
Tortoiseshell cats,
Yeah.
those with the patches of orange and black fur.
Yeah. They're almost always female.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's because the gene for coat color in cats,
Mhm.
it's located on the X chromosome.
Okay.
So a tortoiseshell cat, she'll inherit one X chromosome with the allele for black fur
Okay.
and one X chromosome with the allele for orange fur.
Got it.
And because of X inactivation during development,
Some cells produce black pigment,
and some cells produce orange pigment.
creating that cool tortoiseshell pattern.
Exactly. It's like a visual representation of X inactivation in action.
That's so cool. So their unique fur pattern is literally because of this genetic phenomenon.
Exactly. It really shows how genes and cellular processes can work together in these fascinating ways to shape traits.
Wow, we've covered so much. From basic Mendelian inheritance to these complex sex-linked traits and X inactivation.
It's amazing how far we've come since Mendel's time.
It really is.
Hmm.
But I'm sure there's even more to learn about genetics, right?
Oh, absolutely. The world of genetics is constantly
I
evolving.
can't wait to see what other secrets we uncover. We just explored some pretty complex stuff like sex-linked traits and X inactivation
It's mind-boggling how much we've learned about heredity.
since Mendel's time, right?
Right.
But I feel like the more we uncover, the more we realize just how much more is out there.
Absolutely. It's like every new discovery opens up a whole new world of questions.
Totally. And speaking of interconnectedness, I wanted to ask about something called epistasis.
Okay.
What is that
So
exactly?
basically, epistasis is when one gene can influence how another gene is expressed.
Okay.
It's like imagine genes having a conversation.
Uh-huh.
And one gene's like, hey, I'm going to modify what you're doing, or even, nope, I'm going to completely mask your effects.
Whoa, so it's not just about what alleles you inherit for a specific gene.
Right.
It's about how those alleles interact with alleles from other genes.
Exactly. It's all about these complex interactions.
Do you have an example of this? Epistasis.
Yeah, a great example is seen in Labrador retrievers.
Labs. I love labs.
Right. So they have 3 main coat colors.
Black, chocolate brown, and yellow.
You got it. Now, one gene determines if the pigment will be black or brown. But then there's another gene that controls whether any pigment is deposited in the fur at all.
Wait, so a lab could have the genes for, like, black or brown fur,
Uh-huh.
but still end up with yellow fur.
Exactly. If that second gene says, nope, no pigment, then no matter what the first gene says,
The dog's going to be yellow.
yellow fur, that second gene, it's like it overrides the first one.
Wow. So that second gene is, what did you call it? Epistatic?
Epistatic, yeah. It's basically saying, I have the final say here.
That's so cool. It really highlights how complex these genetic interactions can be.
Oh, yeah. Genetics is full of surprises.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into heredity,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways you'd want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest one is we have to remember Gregor Mendel.
The OG.
Right. His work was groundbreaking, and it's what made all these discoveries possible.
It's amazing how those pea plants changed everything.
It really is.
What else should we remember?
I'd say it's important to realize that inheritance is complex. It's not just black and white, dominant or recessive.
Right, we talked about incomplete dominance, multiple alleles, pleiotropy, and epistasis.
Exactly. There are all these layers that make genetics so fascinating.
And we can't forget about the environment.
Oh, definitely. The environment plays a huge role in shaping who we are.
It's like this constant interplay between nature and nurture, right?
Absolutely. It's what makes each of us unique.
It makes you think, what does it actually mean to be an individual when so much is influenced by factors beyond our control?
That's a great question to ponder.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into heredity.
A journey through the fascinating world of genes.
If you enjoyed this exploration of genetics, remember, there's always more to learn.
Keep asking questions and stay curious.
Thanks for joining us.